So welcome to the first of the Q&A sessions with me, your host, Meta-Nomad. So the questions have been asked by Patreons on the Hermitix Patreon site. So the first question here is, what books have most affected my thinking? I'm actually not going to answer this for the simple fact that when people ask this question, what they're looking for is a route towards some form of knowledge, and I am of the position that the journey someone takes shouldn't be forced in such an artificial manner. Of course, you can ask for specific recommendations, but in terms of what books have most affected my thinking, well, they're the ones that have affected my thinking. And I don't particularly want to give a list of books which are going to, in my opinion, form someone else's thoughts in the same way as mine. I'd rather be thought for themselves. So, in terms of what books have most affected my thinking, I won't be able to articulate why that is because they're my thoughts. So, apologies. However, if you were to ask for books regarding certain thinkers or certain genres or certain topics, I would of course oblige. But general questions, no. Have I read Nick Bostrom's Superintelligence, and how do I see the prospects of an AI singularity in relation to collapse? Okay, we'll start there. There's a second part to that question. Have I read Nick Bostrom's book Superintelligence? Yes, a long time ago, but it was such a long time ago that the practical answer to that question is no. I can remember vague parts of it. However, the person who asks this question mentions the word singularity, AI singularity. I will take that apart for you. So AI is artificial intelligence. Now, one of the key problems in thinking about artificial intelligence is the fact that we have to do so from a human point of view. It's almost always immediately humanized when humans are thinking about these things. But of course, when you're talking about artificial intelligence, it's artificial. It's synthesized via other means outside of human synthesis. So we're not talking about an intelligence which has to apply itself to the same transcendental laws of causality as us. Now, that's my take on AI. Now, with regards to singularity, according to a few thinkers, namely and notably Nick Land, and I'm somewhat in agreement here, the singularity has already happened. The problem is that people don't think in terms of deep time. When was the singularity? It was when zero, the glyph of zero, or the concept or the abstraction of zero, took its place firmly within the culture of humanity, or the world, or the cosmos, which in linear chronological time is the 17th century. Now, why is this a singularity? Well, prior to the universal and global immanentization of zero, you don't have a purely neutral body to apply a metric to. So, the birth and imminent arrival of zero allows there to be a leap from qualitative society to quantitative. That is, things can now be truly measured. So what zero allows for is the birth of accountancy, the birth of finance, the birth of statistics, the birth of data. Zero allows for a complete min-maxing of intelligence, of money, of value, of wealth, of everything. So the singularity isn't a event as one would see it in such a film as Terminator, which is sort of an aesthetic applied to what a singularity would look like in abstract. But a singularity, the scope of how we think about singularities has been so constrained, and really such an event is something that is just entirely not human, and it's extremely difficult to think about. What's its relationship to collapse? I think they're two ends of a certain spectrum, but it's not the collapse progress spectrum. I think, obviously, you have futurists and people like John Michael Greer are often against each other. The AI singularity is the sort of other end of collapse, and it would mean the victory for something else. Yeah. There's a continuation of this question, which is, if artificial general intelligence, strong AI, is invented within a few decades, could that mean the ultimate victory of the technosphere and the cancelling of collapse? Humans might still die off, but AI goes on further still. Well, once again, it's a strange sort of semantic problem with regards to the term victory and the victory of the technosphere. The technosphere is entirely different to AI. The technosphere is the technological effects on human society in general, and you could say the anthrosphere. Now, the technosphere does control, but whether or not it's sort of sentient in that manner, we don't really know. And Dmitry Orlov is one of the sort of propounders of the theory, and I believe he's sort of come up with that name, technosphere. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he sees it in terms of control. Now, it's an inhuman massive connections, a multiplicity of control mechanisms all connected. We can't entirely say what victory would mean for that. But one thing which is notable, which came up with my interview with Nick Land, is things such as AI and things such as the technosphere, in their trajectory, in where they're heading, allows us to actually finally define what humanity and humanism is. Because up until now, we haven't had a true antagonist. And without an antagonist, how do you truly define the protagonist? What we'll find, of course, is that we were never the protagonist. We were, at most, a passing character in a rather longer play. The next question here is, what would I say are my most major disagreements with John Michael Greer? I don't have many. One disagreement is sort of a personal thing with regards to personal biases and affiliations with older forms of technology. I don't have too many sympathies with ye olde forms of technology, horse and plough, horse and cart, hand-drawn things, etc., etc. I think there is a fair amount of sort of fetishism and sympathies towards these things in a sort of fantasy-esque manner, in which many of the collapse people, John included to a certain degree, sort of would like these to come back because there's a certain aesthetic that comes with them of familial, localized neighborhoods. And I personally think that, yes, we probably will return to localized patches and networks of communication and exchange, but they won't look how they are in many people who are fantasizing about these things. What are my thoughts on gender accelerationism and the picture Nix paints about the future of human males? So you're referring to GAC, or the Gender Accelerationist Manifesto, I believe, by Nix Land on Twitter. I read this when it first came out, and since then I haven't spent much time to it, so unfortunately I'm not going to comment, because to do so would just be ignorant. What criteria do I apply in deciding whether or not to invite a guest to interview on my platform? Your questions reveal that you've done plenty of homework, and while guiding the segment, you still press them for clarification when necessary. Do I go into each interview with a plan to find out what I want to know from the guest, what you want others to be exposed to, or what? Okay, first part there, what criteria? My criteria generally is that they are somewhat well known within their field, they use their real name, and they have a presence. There is a sort of status thing happening there. That's unavoidable. My questions reveal that I've done plenty of homework. Yes, I'm probably one of the few podcast hosts that actually does read the books and the work by the guest. I make sure that I read the entire work that I'm interviewing them about, and that's the reason my interviews work. It's because I've read it. I still press them for clarification. Yes, because I think that there is clear questions that want to be asked by people if they were doing this interview, and I'd like to think I have my finger on the pulse of the questions that people are screaming to be asked. Do I go into each interview with a plan? There's two things there. One, usually I will email them a list of questions, and guests like time to go through them. Often guests will be fine on the fly. John Michael Greer is one, Eric Davis was one. They don't need questions. They know their topic and are intuitive enough to be able to just continue the conversation. And there's a kind of brief odd sentence here at the end about something about exposing, or you want others to be exposed to. in exposing people, I mean, Jason Horsley brought me up on this regarding interviewing Richard Kaczynski about the work of Aleister Crowley. Now, as pretty much everyone knows who listens to me, I'm not a big fan of Crowley, and yet if you listen to that interview, I'm excited. Now, it was exciting to talk about Crowley. Crowley had a very interesting life. To say that just because I'm talking about someone means that I fully support everything I did and them as a person, I think is incorrect. I've had every type of thinker on this show and every type of thought, and I'm going to have more so. I enjoy talking about ideas and I enjoy talking about figures in abstract. I don't personally believe that I entirely supported Thelema or anything along those lines, and also I'm of the belief with regards to exposing people to something that if they have got to this stage wherein that they can actually listen or watch it, that is their choice. The title says what is in the podcast. It is entirely their choice to be exposed to something, not mine. What are my 3 favourite films? Apocalypse Now, The Master, and maybe There Will Be Blood, or maybe Event Horizon. Very inhuman films. I like films where humans have sort of become ants via the director. Have I considered having John Cousins back on? Yes, I'm recording an interview with him on Friday. To delve deeper into the writings of Bataille, no, unfortunately not. We're not delving into Bataille, though we probably will touch on him. I greatly enjoyed the first discussion and don't recall much time actually being spent on Bataille. No, the early discussions, the first sort of 8 or so, were fairly amateur, if I do say so myself. And they digressed, but that was still a fun conversation and still one of the more popular ones. What are my long-term goals for the channel, and do you have anyone in mind who inspired you to create content? Right, so the long-term goals are starting from the 29th of this month, so a week tomorrow, is 1 episode every single Wednesday at 5 p.m. GMT released. The Michel Serres series, which I've now officially got 10 scholars, who many of them I'm recording next week. So on top of the 1 episode per week, there will be the occasional as and when Michel Serres episode on a Friday at 5 p.m. GMT. There, I'm currently transcribing many of the interviews into the volumes. One thing on this, I've found that whilst transcribing the interviews, many of them aren't applicable to print. They just don't work, and these actually are the academic ones. So for instance, I was recently transcribing my interview about Dadaism with Krzysztof Wijakowski, and I realized this isn't an interesting interview on paper. It's lovely to listen to, but if you want to read about Dada, you can get better books. So the volume is actually being condensed down to the interviews that you won't be able to get anywhere else. So the ones with John Michael Greer, the ones with Kunstler, the ones with Orlov, and the ones about occultism. These are things which you won't often find in print, and I think that's going to work a lot better. Other long-term goals are, once things are settling down and this is all going well and the content is coming out as it should, I will begin the Continental Current series, which will add another episode a week on starting from Kant and going through every single continental philosopher and all of their work without missing a beat. That will take a lot of research, but I enjoy it. Once all that's settled, and hopefully there's more support, I will begin the Hermitix Current series, which will begin with Atlantis and Lemuria and go through the entire history of esotericism and occultism without missing a beat once again. On top of this, there's the posters, the reading groups. Of course, the Thirst for Annihilation reading group begins next Monday, and everyone is welcome into the Discord chat for that. I will always be in the Discord chat around for discussion. The merchandise should be getting changed. There will be another long-term, very, very long-term reading group on George Gurdjieff's first work in the All and Everything series, which is called Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson. Now, this will, I think, we're roughly going to have to read about 10 pages a week, and going by, this will actually take 2 years to complete. So this will be another chat room where we simply discuss that one text. On top of all of this, I'm currently working on a lecture series on the work of the CCRU. Now, this will only be available to $10 patrons and up, and will be for sale otherwise. It won't be extortionate or anything like that, but this is a side project aside from it still will be affiliated with Hermitix, but a lot of extra work's gone into it, which I'm doing outside of the 8 to 5 hours. So this is something else that I'm dipping into, but these things will always almost always be available to patrons and supporters, and if people are really craving it, I'm sure we can work something out. Do I have anyone in mind who has inspired me to create content? Yes, myself. The only reason that people really create good and honest work is because they didn't see what they wanted to see anywhere else. I always enjoyed listening to podcasts, but I never really listened to the ones I want because I found myself skipping either the first 5 or 10 minutes because they were filled with filler, and then an advert would hit, and then all the way through the host would be injecting their bias. So in terms of inspiration, yes, the inspiration is the podcast I wanted to hear. What have been my most profound religious, spiritual, or supernatural experiences? What are my general religious beliefs and interests presently? In terms of experiences, I'm not going to go into them, because much like the book list, they are entirely subjective, and there's something that I believe people should sometimes keep to themselves unless they covertly or cryptically write about them in some way. But they're very difficult to articulate. But one, for what obviously people are sort of craving for this sort of thing, but I have spoken about it before, but my experience with working through Franz Bardon's Initiation into Hermitix series was a peculiar experience with regards to intuition. What are my general religious beliefs and interests presently? Once again, anyone who listens to other interviews with me will understand that I have gone back to Christianity, which was the religion of my youth. I'm not of any denomination yet, but I am sort of following the word of Christ. If I could put 3 philosophers or thinkers, alive or dead, in a room and be a fly on the wall for their conversation, who would I choose? Friedrich Nietzsche, Immanuel Kant, and Hermes Trismegistus, or George Gurdjieff, actually. Is there such a thing as an authentic self? Once again, I'll mention him again because I think I'm going to be talking about him a lot soon. I'm really, really into the work of George Gurdjieff lately, and he has a lot to say about the self, and I do believe there's such a thing as an authentic self, but I believe stripping back everything which has been put on to burden us in terms of getting to that authentic self is basically impossible to get rid of. 99.9% of people are, according to Gurdjieff, basically dead. They are sleepwalking through life, and the 0.00001% that are able to head back towards some form of genuine self or genuine will have to work really, really hard for it. That's sort of the way I'm leaning to. My favourite occult text, somebody asks, Dion Fortune's Sane Occultism, Manly P. Hall's The Secret Teachings of All Ages, the biography of Aleister Crowley by Richard Kaczynski called Perdurabo, The Chicken Kabbalah by Duquette, and that is all that's springing to mind. What do I think of the prepping and overall collapse community? Largely silly. If you prep and hoard things and people find out you've hoarded things, they will come and take those things, either by force or some other intrusive hostile means. What you really want to do if you want to prepare is learn a skill, because ultimately if people come, you are needed. When pirates attacked ships in the example John Michael Gray gives, they would kill all the other pirates, but they wouldn't kill the chef or the doctor, because those people are always needed. In regards to a post-collapse world, do you share the more optimistic visions of an ecotechnic future, or is it way more primitivist or misanthropic? The primitivist vision is sort of dumbfounded. I never really can get a grasp on it, because unless they spend a lot of excess energy and excess time stripping everything that we've already built down, it's still going to be there. So it will be a mixture. It'll be a strange mixture of people having fires in the bottom of skyscrapers and things like that. But just because the economy collapses doesn't mean that everything the economy has built physically does. So everything will still be here, but there will be a layer of early agrarian society and feudalist society on top of that. Someone asked me here for my modern fiction recommendations. I can't really give you any. The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu is very good, but I mostly read old books because simply most of the modern fiction, it falls into a strange category of either being a bit too politically heavy-handed, a bit too wimpy, or just generally not cynical enough for me. So there isn't much there. Top 3 video games. I haven't played games in years, but The Witcher 3 was good. Stardew Valley is very fun. and Fallout New Vegas. Very fun. Okay, long question here. To my understanding, acceleration is that it posits a reality where the human subject is a desiring machine under the possession or control of the outside forces. Yep, this is largely correct. Humans within the accelerationist process are largely just atomized desiring machines, in the words of Deleuze and Guattari. It continues, together with a lack of human agency in the occult CCRU stuff of Axis, it seems to make atheism rather impossible under this philosophy. This makes accelerationism and religion rather interesting as a topic. I call the body without organs the wellspring of creation as an example, which seems to strengthen my point. My question, therefore, is where you see Christianity and other religions in relation to accelerationism. My point would be that religions are matters of faith and not abstraction or theory, and faith is entirely different. Faith, grace, and charity are entirely different to cultural and philosophical theorizations, and that your faith should overthrow any of these things. So I do believe that in a certain sense, accelerationism is very, very easy to assimilate into a belief system such as Christianity. Where does Jesus, heaven, and hell all play into this? That's the same thing again. Can I go into depth about my criticism of Hegel that me and Grid touched upon recently? Admittedly, my criticism of Hegel is very simplistic. The Hegelian dialectic, which I believe was actually, someone else came up with this, I think it was Fichte. But anyway, the Hegelian dialectic is the simple thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So someone comes up with point A, someone contradicts it or disagrees with it and comes up with a counter-argument B, and then they synthesize their problems into synthesis C, which is sort of like a compromise of sorts. And this is sort of how history is seen, is one thing happens, then another thing counters it, and from that a synthesis happens. The criticism here is this is simply not how things work. I mean, I wrote about this in a recent essay. If you look at, let's say, time is going along linearly, which is of course a mistake, as any Kantian will know, but let's say time is going along linearly, and that's A. A is working lovely. And then B comes along and slices it vertically, and they have a little counter thing, and then A comes back in, or C, the synthesis carries off from the verticality back horizontally, and supposedly that's how things work, and that's all very neat and lovely, but ultimately things like collapses, market crashes, tsunamis, tornadoes, nature, miracles, blah blah blah, these things happen, and these are diagonals. The criticism is life doesn't fit into that neat 1-2-1-2 binary box. Someone asked, what is my philosophical genealogy? I began with Albert Camus, like a lot of people do. I moved from there onto Christopher Hitchens. I had a long new atheism phase. I then moved to a lot of postmodern stuff such as Foster Wallace, DeLillo and Pynchon, and then after that, that's when I began taking philosophy seriously, and because of the postmodern connection, I moved very quickly to the continentals. So I've always had a continental leaning, and then after that it was Kant, and then Land, and then Sayre. I just sort of flicker between many of them now. I don't really have I'm not one of these people who can say I am X or Y. That's not something I'd really want to ever, I think, believe. Opinions on Nassim Taleb's work. Unfortunately, I haven't got round to reading any of them. I began Anti-Fragile at some point, but I wasn't in the mindset, the sort of cybernetic risk, min-maxing mindset that Taleb is in. But I would love to get into his work at some point. That's been the Q&A for, I think I'll do these every other month. I think that will give enough time for good questions to come out. I just want to thank you all for the support you've given me so far, and I'm looking forward to a week tomorrow when this all begins properly. Thanks very much.